The Inheritance of Shadow. Elias, a photographer from Chicago, traveled to the deep bayous of Louisiana to claim an old cabin left by his estranged grandfather. The air in the swamp was thick, humid, and smelled of rotting cypress and stagnant water. As he drove his truck down the narrow, moss-covered dirt road, he felt 1,000 eyes watching him from the dark, tangled trees that lined the path like skeletal guardians. The cabin was a rotting wooden structure perched on stilts over the black, glassy water of the swamp. It looked like it was being swallowed by the vines and Spanish moss that hung from the roof like gray hair. On the front door, someone had carved a strange, circular symbol with a red liquid that looked far too much like dried blood, a warning that Elias chose to ignore. That night, as a thick fog rolled over the water, Elias heard a sound that made his blood turn to ice. It wasn't an animal or the wind. It was a woman's voice, singing a haunting lullaby in a language he didn't recognize. The voice seemed to be coming from directly under the floorboards, vibrating through the wood and into his very bones. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped out onto the porch, the beam cutting through the mist. In the distance, he saw ripples in the black water, but nothing was swimming there. Suddenly, he noticed that the tall cypress trees were closer to the cabin than they had been when he arrived, as if they were slowly crawling toward him when he wasn't looking. In the attic of the cabin, Elias found a collection of old glass jars filled with strange items: bird feathers, human teeth, and small dolls made of swamp grass. At the bottom of a heavy iron trunk, he found a journal. The last entry was dated 40 years ago and simply read, "The swamp doesn't want our prayers, it wants our skin." Elias leaned over the porch railing to wash his face, but when he looked at the water's surface, he didn't see his own reflection. Instead, he saw a pale, bloated face with sewn-shut eyes staring back at him. When he pulled away in horror, a cold, wet hand reached out from the dark water and gripped the wooden stilt of the cabin with inhuman strength. The lullaby grew louder, joining into a chorus of hundreds of voices. Elias looked out into the swamp and saw small, glowing blue lights, will-o'-the-wisps, hovering over the water. Under each light, a skull rose from the mud, their jawbones moving in perfect sync with the terrifying song that was now screaming through the trees. Panicked, Elias ran to his truck, but the tires were buried deep in the mud that had suddenly turned into a thick, black sludge. The road he had used to get there was gone, replaced by endless water and ancient trees that seemed to be interlocking their branches to form a cage around his property. A figure emerged from the fog, standing on a small wooden boat that moved without any oars. It was a tall woman in a tattered red dress, her skin gray like ash and her hair filled with swamp snakes. She held a staff made of a human spine and whispered a single word that caused the ground beneath Elias to shake: "Payback." Elias felt a sharp pain in his chest as his skin began to turn green and scaly, like the bark of a cypress tree. His feet felt heavy, rooting into the soft mud of the porch. He realized with a jolt of terror that the trees in this swamp weren't trees at all. They were the people who had come before him, transformed into eternal prisoners. The black mud began to climb up the cabin's stilts, flowing like a living liquid. It started to fill the rooms, smelling of ancient death. Elias tried to climb to the roof, but his movements were slow and stiff, his joints turning into rigid wood as the swamp's curse took hold of his soul. The tall grass around the cabin began to whisper his secrets, his childhood fears, his darkest regrets, and his name. The swamp wasn't just taking his body. It was feeding on his memories, erasing the man named Elias and replacing him with a mindless, wooden shell that would stand guard for eternity. The woman in the red dress drifted closer, her faceless head tilting as she reached out a cold finger. She offered him a choice: stay as a tree and watch the world pass, or sink into the black water and become part of the chorus of the lost. Before he could answer, the floorboards gave way, plunging him into the freezing abyss below. Beneath the surface, Elias saw the true horror of the bayou. Thousands of bodies were suspended in the water, their hair tangled in the roots, their eyes wide and glowing with a faint blue light. They were the battery that powered the swamp, their eternal suffering keeping the forest alive and growing. The next morning, the fog cleared, and the sun shone on a peaceful-looking Louisiana swamp. The cabin was gone, vanished into the mud without a trace. But near the spot where it once stood, a new, young cypress tree had sprouted, its branches shaped like a man reaching for a sky he would never touch again.